the ocean can turn from breathtaking to brutal in an instant. From a 13-foot tiger shark nearly dragging a surfer under off northern Queensland, to the chilling capsizing of a whale-watching boat in Norway after an orca attacked, in this video, you'll witness 6 harrowing encounters with sharks that turned out to be life-or-death struggles. Join us and see just how unpredictable the ocean's apex predators really are. On the morning of August 24, 2025, the fjords near Tromsø, Norway, were shrouded in a thin mist, the air crisp with the sharp bite of late-summer Arctic chill, and the sea stretching in deep glassy channels framed by towering cliffs that reflected the soft gray of the sky. 10 tourists, bundled in life jackets and heavy coats against the wind, boarded a small, rigid-hulled boat built for whale watching. The vessel bobbed gently as they settled in, excitement sparking at the chance to see orcas in the wild. Among the passengers were 2 Germans, Matthias and Lena Richter, a French couple, Julien and Claire Dubois, 4 Italians, Marco, Sofia, Luca, and Elena Bianchi, and 2 Spaniards, Javier and Rosa Morales, each carrying cameras and phones, eager to capture fleeting glimpses of the black and white giants of the fjord. The boat's operator, a seasoned local named Henrik Olsen, maneuvered the vessel carefully through narrow passages, pointing out signs of whales and explaining the seasonal migration patterns of the herring that often drew orcas into the area. The tourists leaned over the railing, scanning the water with binoculars and cameras, murmurs of anticipation filling the cool air, as Henrik guided them toward a pod spotted just beyond a bend in the fjord, the dorsal fins slicing through the surface at irregular intervals. The group's excitement swelled as the boat slowed to a cautious drift, the tourists whispering among themselves, marveling at the size and grace of the orcas, noting the glossy black skin and striking white patches behind the eyes, unaware of the latent danger beneath the water's placid surface. The pod seemed calm. A few calves were swimming close to their mothers. Henrik's eyes were trained on the largest male, a massive adult whose fin towered above the rest, casting a shadow across the rippling sea. Suddenly, without warning, the largest male surged from below, water spraying violently as it collided with the boat with a force that sent a shudder through the hull. Henrik shouted, bracing himself against the wheel. But the orca's next strike was harder, swinging its massive body and slamming into the starboard side, a deafening crash that splintered the fiberglass and sent tourists tumbling over the railing, screams cut short by the icy water. Panic erupted as the orca's momentum propelled the boat into a near-complete roll, the vessel rocking violently, then tipping further as the massive animal struck again, the impact sending a shockwave through the passengers' bodies, leaving them stunned, cold and disoriented in the frigid Arctic waters, the chill seizing their limbs almost instantly. Life jackets provided some buoyancy, but the shock of the temperature and the violent thrashing of the sea made it difficult to keep heads above water, as strong currents tugged at arms and legs, spinning the tourists away from the wreckage that floated among broken pieces of the hull. 7 of the 10 tourists lost their lives in the chaos, all within just 3 minutes. Matthias Richter clung to a railing fragment before the orca struck again, the sudden surge throwing him against the wreckage with crushing force, his body disappearing beneath the spray. His wife Lena tried to reach him, but the current dragged her into the path of the orca's fluke, the blow breaking her ribs and driving her under before she surfaced only once, gasping in agony before vanishing for good. Julien and Claire Dubois were pulled down together when a violent whirlpool formed around the animal's twisting body, the couple's life jackets useless against the undertow as bubbles and flailing arms marked their final struggle. Marco Bianchi was struck directly when the orca rammed a floating section of hull, the impact smashing the debris into his chest and forcing the air from his lungs as he slipped beneath the waves. Luca tried to swim toward his sisters but was dragged backward, exhaustion overwhelming him until his movements slowed and the cold silenced him beneath the gray surface. Javier Morales, panicked and thrashing, swallowed mouthfuls of seawater while the currents battered him against splintered wreckage, his cries drowned by the roar of the sea until he, too, went still. 3 passengers, however, managed to find fragments of the boat that held their weight, the twisted metal and floating sections providing temporary refuge from the frigid water. Sofia Bianchi, with arms wrapped around a large piece of the railing, kept her legs moving constantly to avoid hypothermia, shivering violently, but managing to breathe in short, controlled gasps while scanning the swirling water for any sign of rescue. Elena clung to a small bench that had broken free, while Rosa Morales managed to keep hold of an overturned section of the hull, her fingers numb, nails scraping against the fiberglass as waves threatened to dislodge her. Each knew the danger of prolonged exposure, the cold turning from painful to life-threatening within minutes, and their minds raced between fear, survival instinct, and the incomprehensible force of the animal that had destroyed their excursion and claimed so many lives within moments. Minutes stretched like hours as the orca, perhaps satisfied or simply uninterested once the boat was broken and most passengers separated, retreated beneath the surface, leaving the fjord eerily quiet except for the splashing of struggling survivors and the distant cries carried by the wind along the cliffs. Rescue helicopters, alerted by Henrik's brief distress call before being thrown from the wheel, arrived swiftly, lowering baskets to pluck the 3 survivors from the icy water, each wrapped in thermal blankets, and rushed to shore, teeth chattering and bodies trembling, hearts pounding from both shock and relief. The bodies of 7 tourists were recovered and brought to the fjord's edge, the tragedy laying bare the lethal combination of natural curiosity, human vulnerability, and the unpredictable strength of a wild predator in its own environment. Investigators who examined the incident attributed the attack to unusually aggressive orca behavior, noting that the late summer migration of herring could incite heightened territorial or feeding instincts among males, particularly dominant adults. Authorities immediately suspended all tourist excursions in the fjords, issuing warnings for small vessels and emphasizing the danger posed by wildlife that could not be fully anticipated or controlled. Locals and guides spoke in hushed tones about the power of the Arctic Sea and its predators, reminding one another that even creatures often regarded as gentle or intelligent could, in certain circumstances, become devastatingly lethal, leaving a permanent mark on those who witnessed the events and the families of those who did not survive. On the morning of February 23, 2025, the waters off northern Queensland were bright under the sun, a steady breeze carrying the scent of salt and warmth across the shallow reef channels. And surfers dotted the waves, boards glinting as they cut through the turquoise swell. Among them was 27-year-old Liam Carter, an experienced local surfer with sun-bleached hair and lean muscles honed from years riding the Coral Sea. Alongside his friends, each enjoying the rare calm of the late summer morning, the group had gathered near a reef known for abundant fish and occasional shark sightings, the water clear enough to see shadows moving beneath but shallow enough to tempt playful antics. Liam, in a mischievous mood, decided to pull a prank, grabbing a small mesh bag of chum and slowly trailing it just behind the board of his friend, 25-year-old Jake Reynolds, laughing at the thought of the harmless scare that would surely follow. No one imagined that the prank would spiral into a violent fight for survival against one of the ocean's most formidable predators. At first, the prank seemed harmless, a thin trail of blood and fish bits drifting on the current, attracting curious fish and the occasional large shadow beneath the surface. Friends laughed and paddled closer to see the reaction, teasing Liam and Jake, unaware that the shimmer of chum in the sunlit water had drawn the attention of a massive tiger shark patrolling the area, a 13-foot adult male, its body sleek and muscular, mottled with dark stripes that ran along the golden-gray skin, eyes black and unyielding as it tracked the scent. The shark rose with sudden explosive speed, water erupting around its head, and before anyone could react, it slammed into Jake's board with a deafening impact that sent foam and spray in all directions. The board twisted violently beneath him, and in the same motion, the shark's jaws clamped onto his right calf with terrifying precision, teeth sinking deep, the pain immediate and searing as the icy water filled his mouth and lungs with shock. He was pulled downward, limbs flailing in instinctive resistance, the currents and the predator's strength dragging him beneath the surface in a chaotic tumble of spray and terror. Liam, who had been just meters away, paddled frantically toward his friend, his arms slicing through the water as adrenaline surged, heart hammering in his chest, eyes locked on the predator that circled with deliberate, threatening movements, each pass of its powerful tail creating waves that knocked him off balance. The tiger shark lunged again, jaws snapping inches from Liam's outstretched arms, the sound of teeth colliding with fiberglass and water echoing through the turmoil of the surf, a violent blur of motion and chaos that left both men reeling in shock and pain. The water churned with white foam and red streaks, punctuated by the desperate splashes of limbs and boards as friends attempted to intervene, pounding the surface with paddles, waving arms, and anything that could create enough disturbance to draw the shark's attention away, each second stretching endlessly. The sky bright above contrasting with the darkness of the ocean below, where danger lurked unseen. Jake struggled to keep his head above the surface, blood streaming down his leg, searing through the cold water and into his consciousness. as fear and pain mixed into an overwhelming, disorienting haze. Each breath was a battle, lungs burning while he kicked violently, trying to reach floating debris and his board, which had been torn and partially crushed by the shark's initial strikes. The predator struck twice more, raking its teeth across the board and water with terrifying precision, sending sprays of blood and foam into the air, forcing Jake to twist, dodge, and kick frantically in a desperate dance of survival, muscles screaming and energy waning with every movement. Around him, friends continued to create chaos, pounding water with paddles, shouting and splashing in an attempt to break the predator's focus, a coordinated yet frantic effort to buy time, to distract the apex predator long enough for the injured man to escape the deadly circle forming in the warm, shallow waves. Finally, after what felt like endless minutes, the tiger shark, perhaps deciding the effort was no longer worth the risk or frustrated by the unrelenting human resistance, veered away, disappearing beneath the surface in a cloud of stirred sand and silvery fish, leaving behind a scarred tableau of floating boards, churning red water, and a lone survivor clinging to debris, shaking violently from shock, cold, and the adrenaline that still coursed through his veins. Liam and other friends scrambled to reach him, hauling him onto a partially intact section of board, inspecting the deep lacerations that covered his calf, ankle, and foot, the flesh torn and bleeding profusely, each movement causing waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm him. But survival instinct held firm as he focused on staying afloat, keeping his breathing steady despite the terror and trauma of the attack. Emergency services arrived within minutes after a nearby observer had radioed for help, paramedics wading into the water to lift Jake onto a rescue vessel, wrapping him in thermal blankets and applying immediate first aid to staunch the bleeding while calming him as best they could amid the chaos of adrenaline and shock. Onlookers described the attack as a violent blur of teeth and chaos, a brutal reminder of the ocean's power and the deadly consequences of curiosity and provocation, even in waters frequented by humans for sport and leisure. The incident served as a sobering warning about the unpredictability of apex predators and the razor-thin line between play and life-threatening danger. The consequences of human impulsiveness colliding with natural aggression in a vivid, unforgettable confrontation that left permanent marks on both body and memory. Authorities later emphasized that tiger sharks, while generally solitary and opportunistic feeders, could respond aggressively when attracted by chum or blood, particularly during summer months when prey was abundant, and that even small playful gestures could provoke fatal outcomes. Surfers and guides across the region reassessed safety protocols, understanding anew the importance of respecting both the strength and instinct of the ocean's predators. For Jake, the memory of teeth, the roar of water, and the violent pull of the sea lingered long after rescue, a visceral imprint of a near-death struggle that had transformed a simple prank into an enduring lesson on the lethal consequences of human recklessness amid the raw power of nature. On the morning of November 12, 2016, the waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, shimmered under a pale spring sun, the surface rippling gently over the kelp-strewn seabed, a place long renowned for great white sharks drawn to the dense population of seals and the labyrinth of underwater forests that provided both shelter and hunting grounds. 6 professional divers, assembled for a documentary project, prepared their gear meticulously aboard a small research vessel, checking regulators, oxygen tanks, and cameras that would capture intimate behaviors of the apex predators. Among them was 31-year-old Marco Jensen, a veteran of numerous deep-sea expeditions whose calm, methodical demeanor belied the tension that accompanies any dive into waters dominated by creatures capable of striking with lethal force in an instant. Alongside him were 5 colleagues, each equally experienced and aware of the risks, yet driven by the rare opportunity to observe and film great whites in the wild. Their anticipation mingled with professional caution as the boat drifted over the kelp forest anchored at a site chosen for its high density of marine activity. 30 minutes into the dive, the team adjusted their positions along a reinforced platform designed to float just below the surface, the divers' cameras angled to capture the undulating shadows among the kelp fronds. The water was clear, visibility unusually good for Gansbaai, allowing the divers to track schools of fish and occasional seals darting through the tangle of kelp. Marco, scanning the water with a practiced eye, noticed a massive shadow moving with deliberate stealth beneath the forest, a presence that seemed disproportionate to any ordinary fish or seal. Before he could signal a warning, the shadow surged upward, a towering, sleek body breaking through the water with explosive force as a 16-foot great white lunged, ramming the platform with a violence that sent shockwaves through the metal structure and through every diver's chest. Panic erupted immediately, bubbles spouting from regulators as the divers struggled to maintain orientation, flailing limbs slicing through water while the predator circled, assessing the intrusion and striking again with targeted precision. The shark's attacks were swift, powerful, and terrifyingly accurate, its immense jaws snapping near exposed arms and legs, tearing through neoprene and flesh with a force that defied anticipation. Marco instinctively tried to shield a colleague, pushing against the current and the predator's momentum, but the orifice of its mouth passed within inches of his hands, powerful muscles flexing as it recoiled and lunged once more. Screams were muffled by regulators, but the terror was visible in every movement. Flailing arms, sudden evasions, and desperate kicks as the divers attempted to evade the predator's repeated assaults. Within 5 minutes, 3 of the divers had sustained fatal injuries. The shark targeting areas left vulnerable during the chaos, and their bodies were torn and drifting, carried by currents that twisted through the kelp forest, disappearing into shadowed recesses while the remaining 3 struggled desperately to stay upright, lungs burning, heart pounding, as adrenaline surged through every fiber of their being. Cameras mounted on the platform captured the full horror of the attack. Bubbles streaming upward in frantic spirals, limbs flailing in attempts to dodge powerful strikes, and the massive silhouette of the shark passing repeatedly, black and white body a blur against the greenish water of the kelp forest. Marco fought to maintain focus, eyes scanning for any advantage, hands gripping equipment to prevent drifting too far from the platform while simultaneously trying to avoid the predator's snapping jaws. Each breath through the regulator became a conscious effort, timing inhalations with evasive maneuvers as the shark circled with patient aggression, calculating its next strike. The ocean seemed to close in, the dense forest of kelp twisting and writhing as if alive itself, reflecting the chaos above and below, making escape routes less predictable, and heightening the sense of confinement and danger for the divers who had thought themselves prepared for any eventuality. The 3 surviving divers managed to reach the surface only after what felt like endless moments of pure terror, kicking and clawing at the water with exhausted limbs, the platform partially broken and spinning as currents shifted. They clung to pieces of equipment and floating cameras, shivering violently from the cold and adrenaline, watching in disbelief as the predator, after a series of final strikes that left a scarred pattern on the remaining platform, retreated into the depths, leaving behind a trail of bubbles, churned water, and the bodies of their fallen colleagues. Once aboard the research vessel, paramedics and local authorities attended to the survivors, wrapping them in thermal blankets and administering first aid, though their injuries were minor compared to the physical and psychological trauma they had endured. Their accounts described the experience as pure terror, emphasizing the impossibility of preparing for the raw, overwhelming power of a great white, determined to assert dominance over intruders in its hunting grounds. Investigations confirmed an unusual spike in aggressive great white activity in Gansby during that week, possibly linked to a dense concentration of prey that had drawn multiple adult sharks into territorial overlap. Authorities issued warnings to other divers, emphasizing extreme caution and limiting underwater filming in areas known for apex predator activity, stressing that even the most experienced professionals are vulnerable in the presence of a fully grown great white acting with instinctive force. The surviving divers recounted in detail the sensation of being trapped within the shark's sphere of influence, the speed and accuracy of its strikes, and the overwhelming sense of power radiating from the predator as it lunged with terrifying precision, noting that experience, training, and calm nerves offered only partial protection against a creature evolved to dominate the sea. The incident became a chilling reminder to marine professionals and enthusiasts alike that the ocean, however familiar or scientifically studied, remained a domain ruled by creatures whose strength, instincts, and unpredictability could turn a routine expedition into a nightmare within moments. Even in waters as well charted and frequented as Gansby, where divers and researchers routinely enter the realm of apex predators, the encounter demonstrated the razor-thin margin between observation and catastrophe, between admiration and mortal danger, leaving an indelible imprint on those who survived, and a permanent record of the lethal potential of the great whites that roam the South African coastline, their presence a silent, ever-present warning in the deep blue. In the late morning of August 14, 2022, the sun hung high over the Santa Barbara coastline, casting a sparkling shimmer across the rolling waves that lapped against the sandy shore and rocky outcroppings. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the ocean beyond the break was dotted with jet skis, paddleboarders, and swimmers enjoying the summer warmth. Among the recreational visitors was 29-year-old Brandon Hayes, an experienced jet skier known for his daring stunts and precise control, who had chosen a stretch of water near a baited area frequented by pelagic fish. His goal was simple: to push the limits of speed, launching off waves with precision, soaring high for fleeting bursts of exhilaration before crashing back onto the restless sea. The morning began as any other, water sparkling under the sun, spray flaring from his board as he raced over the swells, each jump sending him higher and faster, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he pushed the boundaries of thrill and control. Brandon had executed a few successful jumps when he noticed a faint ripple below the surface, a subtle shadow that moved unnaturally beneath the glittering water. Moments later, the shadow became a blur of motion. A predator coiled and ready to strike. Without warning, a 10-foot shortfin mako exploded from the depths, launching itself through the air with astonishing speed and force, colliding with Brandon's jet ski in a deafening crash of fiberglass and spray. The impact sent him tumbling violently into the surf, the world spinning as he collided with the icy water, lungs filling with shock and salt. His limbs flailed instinctively, hands gripping the water as the predator circled, tail thrashing and jaws snapping just inches from his arms, teeth glinting as they passed dangerously close. Foam erupted around him, waves smashing and spinning him in every direction, the rush of the attack overwhelming every sense with its raw intensity. A violent ballet of water, teeth, and fear that transformed a recreational stunt into a life-threatening ordeal in an instant. Brandon fought to regain control, kicking toward his jet ski, which had partially righted itself but now bobbed like a broken toy amid the chaos. Water splashing over the board with each lunge of the mako, which attacked repeatedly, testing the limits of both predator and prey. He reached for the handlebars, but the shark's speed was unmatched. Its sleek body cut through the water with precision, each strike faster and more violent than the last, teeth grazing his leg and shoulder as he struggled to maintain his grip. Spray and foam obscured vision, adrenaline and fear locked every nerve in overdrive, and the violent oscillation of waves combined with the predator's repeated assaults made every second feel infinite, as if the ocean itself had become an arena for a brutal duel of survival. Lifelong experience on the water offered only partial defense. Instinct, strength, and training were pitted against raw, unrelenting predatory power, and even the simplest movements required perfect timing and awareness to avoid further injury. Minutes passed, though they stretched like hours in Brandon's perception, every moment defined by rapid decisions and frantic action. The shark struck at floating debris, snapping teeth through foam and spray, sometimes missing entirely but leaving arcs of red and white in its wake. Brandon twisted, turned, and kicked with precision born of repeated experience, desperately maneuvering through waves that threatened to pin him down or push him into shallow rocks. His hands grazed the handles of the jet ski, the fiberglass scraping against wet skin as the mako's attention returned repeatedly to the floating vehicle, each strike driving him deeper into adrenaline and terror, the roar of the ocean drowned only by the pulsing awareness of the predator circling, ready to erupt again with speed, force, and lethal intent. Finally, the sound of sirens and the sight of approaching lifeguards brought a sliver of hope amid the chaos, their boats cutting through the waves as they directed loud shouts and splashes to distract the shark. Brandon seized the moment, kicking with desperate energy to reach the lifeguard vessel, clinging to the side as trained personnel waded into the surf, extending arms and ropes to haul him aboard, wrapping him in blankets and stabilizing his condition. Bleeding from shallow lacerations across his leg and shoulder, bruised and shaken, he gasped for air, body trembling violently from shock and exertion, the adrenaline slowly giving way to awareness of what had just occurred. Around him, water churned with foam and remnants of the jet ski, and the shark had finally departed, slipping back into deeper channels, leaving behind only the violent imprint of its brief, terrifying dominance. Witnesses along the beach recounted the scene with disbelief, describing the attack as an intense blur of motion and sound, teeth snapping within inches of Brandon's hands, waves smashing in chaotic succession, and the predator's speed and aggression transforming a controlled stunt into a life-or-death struggle that left bystanders speechless. Lifeguards emphasized the unpredictability of short-fin makos, noting that their combination of speed, power, and aerial capability made them particularly dangerous when provoked or attracted by baited areas, even inadvertently. The incident became a sobering lesson for recreational water enthusiasts, illustrating the razor-thin line between daring performance and mortal risk, the raw reality of apex predators, and the consequences of pushing limits in waters where humans are guests rather than masters. In the aftermath, local authorities issued reminders about the dangers of extreme stunts near areas frequented by predatory fish, particularly near baited zones intended for fishing or observation. Brandon recovered physically within weeks, though the psychological scars lingered longer. The vivid memory of teeth flashing, water exploding, and waves smashing, embedding a lasting understanding of the fragile balance between thrill-seeking and survival. Friends and family noted the intensity of his account, the precise recollection of every strike, every splash, and the unrelenting power of the predator that had transformed a sunny morning into a near-fatal encounter. The chaotic, violent moments became a stark reminder that, even with skill, experience, and preparation, the ocean retains its power to surprise, dominate, and enforce its own rules in the most immediate and visceral ways. In the early hours of November 16, 2023, the turquoise waters of the Bahamas darkened ominously as a tropical storm surged unexpectedly across the archipelago, sending wind and rain whipping through the rigging of small fishing vessels scattered across the offshore waters. 60 miles from the nearest island, the fishing boat Sea Venture, a modest vessel built for coastal and near offshore work, pitched violently with every swell, the crew of 4 struggling to maintain footing on the slick, heaving deck. Nets full of freshly caught fish threatened to spill with each monstrous wave, lines snapping and ropes whipping under the combined force of wind and water. The storm came without warning, a sudden wall of gray and green, twisting the horizon and throwing the boat into a relentless rhythm of pitch and roll that made even the simplest task a precarious gamble between survival and disaster. The men, hardened fishermen accustomed to unpredictable seas, clung to rails and ropes, voices nearly lost to the roar of wind and waves, each second a battle against the elements. As the boat lurched sharply to starboard, scattering nets and coils of rope, a darker presence moved beneath the churning surface, drawn to the scent of bait and the disturbance of the storm. A 10-foot oceanic whitetip circled just beneath the deck, its long, rounded fins slicing through the frothy waves with deliberate, predatory grace. The shark's eyes, black and unyielding, tracked the movement of the crew, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, with explosive speed, the predator lunged upward, jaws opening to reveal rows of sharp, serrated teeth, snapping at a dangling arm and tearing into the nets with terrifying efficiency. A spray of seawater and shredded line erupted across the deck, slamming into the fishermen and tossing them like ragdolls as adrenaline surged, hearts hammering, instincts screaming to react before the shark struck again. The boat shuddered under the assault, the wooden hull creaking and groaning as if protesting against the assault from both nature and predator, every wave carrying with it the threat of capsizing or worse. Fernando Castillo, a 38-year-old fisherman with a lifetime at sea, lunged to push the shark away from the frantically snapping nets, but a violent bite grazed his forearm, flesh torn and blood spilling into the spray-laden deck. Pain seared through him and his grip faltered for a split second, almost enough for the predator to capitalize on the opening. Splashes erupted around him as the oceanic whitetip circled again, its movements swift and precise, cutting through the storm-churned water with incredible power, snapping at anything that moved or hung within reach of its jaws. The crew responded with instinctive force, slamming long poles against the hull, hitting the shark with repeated strikes intended more to intimidate than to injure. But each hit was met with the shark's relentless persistence, drawing its attention back to dangling limbs, torn nets, and the chaotic turmoil of the vessel caught between predator and storm. Waves crashed over the deck, seawater mixing with blood, salt, and iron tang burning their mouths and noses. Yet there was no room to retreat. The boat pitched and rolled violently, and losing balance could mean falling into the teeth of the shark or being swept overboard by the storm's fury. Minutes stretched like hours as the small vessel endured the dual onslaught of nature and predator, the crew locked in a desperate dance of survival, shouting, striking, and bracing against the pitching deck. Lines whipped across faces, rain-stung eyes, and every swing of the poles or frantic shove of the shark created further chaos. Yet it was necessary to maintain a fragile perimeter between human and predator. One wave struck with such force that a bundle of nets slid across the deck, nearly knocking Fernando to the wet surface, his injured arm a raw reminder of the stakes. The shark lunged once more, teeth snapping just inches from another crewman's leg, the sound of water and impact deafening in the tumult. And yet the fishermen refused to relent, slamming, bashing, and yelling, channeling every ounce of fear and strength into holding their ground against a predator that had turned their storm-ridden fishing day into a life-or-death ordeal. Eventually, after several tense minutes that seemed endless, the oceanic white-tip retreated, disappearing beneath the foam and spray, the storm masking its departure as the vessel heaved with every towering wave. The crew, soaked to the bone, shivering violently and bloodied from minor injuries, leaned heavily against rails and ropes, gasping for air, minds racing to comprehend the narrow escape. Fernando's arm throbbed painfully, a deep gash reminding him that even small errors or hesitation could have proven fatal, and the others inspected minor cuts and bruises, all grateful for survival, yet shaken to their core. The storm continued to rage, but the predator no longer loitered, leaving the fishermen to navigate the remaining miles to calmer waters with a heightened awareness of both the power of the sea and the lethality of its inhabitants. In the aftermath, local authorities and coast guards noted the incident as a rare but dangerous interaction, emphasizing that oceanic whitetips, while not the most frequently encountered species, could display aggressive behavior when provoked, attracted to blood or bait, or when sea conditions created high turbulence that disoriented prey and humans alike. Witnesses later recounted the attack with awe and disbelief, describing the raw intensity of splashing water, snapping teeth, flying nets, and the terrifying precision of a predator, able to exploit chaos with deadly efficiency. The incident became a cautionary tale for fishermen and recreational water users alike, highlighting the fragile balance between human activity and the unpredictable, untamed forces of the open ocean, and leaving the crew of Sea Venture with an indelible memory of adrenaline, fear, and the power of a hunter perfectly adapted to its environment. Even hours later, as calmer waters were approached, each crewman recounted the sequence in vivid detail. Teeth closing just short of limbs, waves smashing across the deck, and the shark's relentless presence creating a suffocating atmosphere of tension. The story would travel through the local fishing communities, retold as an example of vigilance, respect for the ocean, and the unpredictable danger lurking in even familiar waters. A stark reminder that survival depends on readiness, courage, and a measure of luck in the presence of nature's apex hunters. On the afternoon of March 18, 2024, the waters off Gansbaai, South Africa, were restless under a gray sky streaked with gusty wind, the Atlantic waves churning in restless currents that reflected both the sun's pale light and the underlying danger lurking beneath. A luxury yacht, the Ocean Dream, glided carefully over the choppy water, its polished hull cutting through swells as passengers leaned over railings and photographed the rolling sea, excited by the drama of the open ocean. Among them was 12-year-old Ethan Meyer, a boy with sun-streaked hair, wide green eyes, and a curiosity that made him restless near the water's edge, leaning too far in his eagerness to capture the perfect shot. The yacht had slowed, the captain reducing speed to steady the vessel in the uneven swell so the passengers could pose and snap pictures. The wind whipped at their hair, the Atlantic spray stinging faces, and the yacht pitched gently with each rolling wave, creating the illusion of control in waters that were anything but predictable. In a single catastrophic instant, a wave rose higher than anticipated, striking the deck with violent force. Ethan, momentarily unbalanced, lost his footing, arms flailing as he tumbled over the side, plunging into the icy water below. The Atlantic was shockingly cold, wrapping his body in an immediate searing chill that stole his breath and numbed his limbs. Within seconds, a shadow emerged beneath him, a massive presence moving with deliberate and predatory intent. A 15-foot great white rose explosively, drawn by the frantic splashing, thrashing, and sudden movement of a young body in its hunting grounds. The shark struck with terrifying precision, jaws clamping onto Ethan's leg, pulling him downward with bone-crushing force, twisting his body beneath the waves as panic surged through the boy's lungs and muscles. Saltwater and fear filled his mouth as he kicked violently, desperate to escape. But the predator's strength and instinct left him nearly powerless in the icy, swirling current. Chaos erupted on the deck of the yacht as crew members scrambled, hands grabbing flotation devices and life rings, voices shouting warnings and encouragement over the roar of wind and surf. Captain Willem van der Merwe leaned over the railing, eyes wide with terror, gripping a rope as he directed others to act quickly, knowing that even seconds could make the difference between life and death. Other passengers shouted in panic, some frozen in disbelief while trained crew hurled devices into the water, trying to create distance between the boy and the shark. But the predator was relentless, circling with deliberate, menacing movements, snapping jaws mere inches from Ethan's arms each time he stretched toward a float or piece of debris. Foam and spray churned violently around him, red streaks spreading through the water as blood and bubbles mingled, the ocean transforming into a chaotic battlefield where raw power and survival instincts collided in a frenzy of teeth, water, and flailing limbs. Ethan's limbs burned with exertion and cold, adrenaline pumping through every fiber of his body as he twisted and kicked to keep his head above water. The shark lunged again, jaws raking his leg, tearing through neoprene and flesh alike, each strike leaving him weakened yet still desperate to survive. His small hands grasped at the nearest flotation ring, then at debris floating from the yacht, the current spinning him with each movement as the great white's shadow flickered beneath him, moving with terrifying speed. Time seemed distorted, seconds stretching into eternity. Each heartbeat a loud drum in his ears as the predator circled, the power of its muscles propelling it with relentless efficiency. Its black eyes fixed on him as if calculating every reaction, every desperate flail, and responding instantly with instinctual aggression. The crew on the yacht acted with rapid coordination, throwing ropes, reaching over the railing, and pounding the water with poles to distract the predator, creating chaos that finally diverted its attention momentarily. This brief hesitation allowed lifeguards from a nearby rescue boat to arrive, cutting through the waves and spraying seawater across the deck as they maneuvered to Ethan's position. Harnesses were lowered and trained arms grabbed him, pulling him from the frigid water with frantic urgency, his body shaking violently from cold, shock, and the lingering grip of terror. Deep lacerations ran across his leg and calf, bloodied and raw, while scrapes and bruises covered his arms from flailing against both water and debris. Every movement hurt, yet the relief of being lifted from the predator's reach provided a fleeting but essential moment of clarity amid the adrenaline and lingering fear. Once aboard the rescue vessel, medics assessed his injuries, applying pressure to deep cuts and wrapping him in thermal blankets to counteract hypothermia. His eyes, wide and unblinking, reflected the trauma of the moments spent underwater, the stark memory of teeth snapping within inches of his hands, the violent thrashing of the predator, and the sensation of being utterly powerless in the face of raw, predatory power. Captain van der Merwe and crew members, still soaked and exhausted, recounted their frantic efforts to maintain distance between the boy and the shark, throwing devices and shouting commands, actions that had proved critical in preventing a fatal outcome. The entire episode, lasting barely 2 minutes, left a profound impact on all who witnessed it, a chilling reminder of the speed, strength, and unpredictability of great whites in their natural environment. Authorities who investigated the incident noted the unusual aggressiveness of great whites in the area that week, likely drawn by abundant prey and stirred by the unpredictable currents and splashes from passing vessels. Experts emphasized that even brief exposure to such apex predators could result in life-threatening situations, highlighting the importance of vigilant supervision, preparedness, and respect for the power of the ocean. The incident became a case study in both the limitations of human reaction and the extraordinary capabilities of great whites, illustrating how quickly ordinary recreational activity could escalate into a violent, near-fatal confrontation. Ethan's survival was attributed to rapid crew response, flotation devices, and a measure of luck in a scenario where instincts, power, and timing converge with terrifying speed.